Hi, my name is Matt Frank. I'm the president of the Governor Bellingham-Cary House. Thank you so much for coming to this event. As you can see, we have a full house today. It's nice and rainy outside, so it's a perfect day to be in here joining us. This is part of a series of events that the city has sponsored with the Governor Bellingham-Cary House, the 250 committee, the cultural. I'll let Lourdes say all those different things. I just want to, on behalf of our board and our trustees, thank the city for all the help that they put in. Thank all of our guest speakers, and also especially thank our education subcommittee, which consists of Mimi Graney, Janet Sator, and then Lee Farrington, who is not here today. I would love if we can give them a round of applause for their doing. It's a tremendous amount of work. I get to stand up here and take the credit, and they did all the work, so I just want to make sure they get their flowers, as the kids say these days. So, yeah, that's a new slang I learned the other day, giving somebody their flowers. So, thank you guys so much. This is about the Battle of Chelsea Creek. Many of us were having conversations before this started about how, like, Bunker Hill gets so much recognition. Concord and Lexington get so much recognition. And this is sometimes kind of like that forgotten battle, even though it's supremely important. So thank you guys for being part of the new movements to make sure that people know that this happened, where it happened, and why it happened. So Lourdes, maybe some words from the city?
Oh, thank you. My name is Lourdes Alvarez, and I'm the Arts and Culture and Creative Economy Manager for the City of Chelsea. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for all the hard work that the Cary House Association has been doing to keep this house open. It's our privilege. We have received, as Matt said, a grant from the Massachusetts 250 celebrations. As part of those celebrations, we are hosting this series of open houses, and we will have a main event on May the 24th, that is the Battle of the Chelsea Creek celebration, when the Ernestina Morrissey, a historical schooner that now is part of the Massachusetts Maritime Academy from the Permanent Fleet, it's coming to Chelsea. We will have reenactors, we will have beer gardens, food vendors, and a whole day of celebrations. We also have been very gracious that we have worked with Bob and the East Boston Museum, Historical Museum. So celebrations will also happen on the other side of the creek with reenactors, Perry Sue, and another whole set of festivities, and the Cary House will be open that day as well. And this is because we want, so the Battle of the Chelsea Creek, it's a battle that had happened in this battlefield that it's gone, and you will learn more from the experts. So Chelsea plays a role, but the surrounding communities also plays a role, and the biggest takeaway is the battle was about resources and put this battle into the siege of Boston. So that is kind of like the legacy that we want to leave for this 250th anniversary. As Matt was saying, this unforgotten or untold story we want for everyone to know. So next year, when you think about Bunker Hill, on Concord, or Lexington, you also think about the Battle of the Chelsea Creek and their important role in the local history and the country's history. So enjoy the talk. It has been a great privilege. I learned a lot. I'm from Uruguay, so I never expected to be leading the most patriotic celebration in Chelsea. So I'm super humble for the opportunity and also nervous. So I appreciate all your help and all your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we'll leave it to Bob Ellison and Jeffrey Perlman. I would say on your way out, we're a nonprofit. None of us make any money, so feel free to donate on your way out, knowing it would go directly into the house. And feel free to join as members, because we're actively looking for membership. Thank you, guys.
Before we begin, Bob Allison, and Rev 250 is one organization I'm involved in, and in 2015, to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Liberty Tree, which was one of the signal events beginning the war for independence, the movement for independence. Actually, in 1766, Parliament revoked the Stamp Act. The margin in Parliament was 108 votes. To commemorate that, in 1766, Bostonians made 108 copper lanterns, or they hung 108 lanterns from the Liberty Tree. So to commemorate that in 2015, Revolution 250 had 108 lanterns made, which we processed through the streets of Boston to the Liberty Tree site. Different community groups worked on the stamping the interior. We illuminated that parcel as we began our decade of commemorating the beginnings of American independence. So it's my real privilege as part of Revolution 250 to present this lantern to the Bellingham-Cary house, so they can keep the light of liberty burning here. So thank you. Just to follow up on what Lourdes said, and then I'll let my colleague get a word in edgewise. We don't remember Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill, because they were the most significant. We remember them because the peoples in Lexington, Concord, Charlestown choose to remember. And Chelsea and East Boston have a real opportunity to tell the story of this battle and this moment. And it's not for the benefit of us, it's for the benefit of the 21-month-old girl that Lourdes is holding and the other young people in Chelsea and East Boston who will then grow up telling this story, so people outside of Chelsea and East Boston will be able to tell it. So we are really here to keep this story alive. And actually, no one's better at doing this than my good friend, Jeff Perlman.
Thanks, Bob. Before I begin, I just want to tell you about myself. Before I became an adjunct professor at Salem State College, I taught in Revere for 36 years. Taught middle school. And I got a million stories, but one that really sticks out in my mind is my first year teaching there. Girl raises her hand, it was around December. Mr. Perlman, yeah. You're Jewish, aren't you? I said, uh-oh. Yeah? You Jews, you don't celebrate Christmas, do you? I said, no. No, you celebrate that other holiday, Heineken? Can't make up stories like that. Well, I want to thank the Bellingham-Cary House for inviting Professor Allison and me to speak to you about such a tremendous event, the Battle of Chelsea Creek. And as Bob mentioned, one of the reasons why it's considered a minor cattle raid, which it really wasn't, was because it was sandwiched in between the battles of Lexington and Concord in April and Bunker Hill on June 17th. But today, this morning, the two of us will try to enlighten you about the battle, the background, and most importantly, the significance of the Battle of Chelsea Creek. So, without any further ado, let's begin. By the way, before I begin, I want to mention to you that as a city historian in Revere, I want to mention that we were a part of Chelsea for a long time. We were Rumney Marsh up until 1739 when Chelsea was established, and we were part of Chelsea along with Winthrop from 1739 to 1846. So any events that happened, including the Revolutionary War between 1739 and 1846, Chelsea. In 1846, we became North Chelsea until 1871. As I tell my students, if you want to study who participated in Revere in the American Civil War, don't look under Revere, look under North Chelsea. And in 1871, as the community blossomed and schools started to be built, we became known as the town of Revere, named, of course, after Paul Revere. And we remained a town until 1915, when we elected our first mayor, Andrew Burns, and we became the city of Revere, 1915. So that's a little bit of the history of our town, and of course, we have so much in common, not only the Battle of Chelsea Creek, but Slade's Mill right down the road here. I gave a lecture on Slade's Mill here at the Bellingham-Cary House several years ago. Would love to do it again if invited. It's has a tremendous history to it, both economically as well as historically. Okay. Well?
So, the British were occupying Boston. The Harbor Islands was what Boston used as their granary. Now, Boston is a fist surrounded by agricultural towns that provided Boston with livestock, food, hay for the livestock, firewood, other things. So Dorchester, Roxbury, Charlestown, Winnissima, Chelsea, were all provisioning grounds for Boston. Noddle's Island, which is now East Boston, specifically the Jeffreys Point to Orient Heights, was where Bostonians would graze their cattle and their sheep. Hog Island, which is now Orient Heights, you'll never guess what you would have found on Hog Island. Okay, so this is the provisioning ground, and the Continental Forces who were surrounding Boston in an arc really from Cambridge to Roxbury recognized that the British had these islands for provisions. They wanted to strip them of that. So in May of 1775, this is after, the siege really begins after Lexington and Concord. The day begins a raid for cannon and munitions being stockpiled in Concord. It ends with about 20,000 militia troops surrounding Boston. The British have their fleet in the harbor, they have their troops in the town of Boston, and they need the livestock that's on the islands as well as the hay that's on the island. So the Continentals begin raiding for the livestock, the forage. So, do you want to tell us what happens next?
Of course, of course. A little background, first of all, before I talk about battle. Going back to the 17th century, the British passed a series of acts called the Navigation Acts. They were jealous of our trade, they were jealous of the money that we were making. So these Navigation Acts were restrictions upon our trade, who to trade with, how many crew members had to be British, ships had to be built in Britain and not in American shipyards, tariffs, were imposed, of course, and they were basically ignored between 1689 and 1763 because of the wars for empire between Great Britain and France. They couldn't really look at us and at the war at the same time. And so we were getting away with what was called salutary neglect. We were not obeying the Navigation Acts, and we were trading and going on our business like nothing happened. From 1754 to 1761, the French Indian War, the 7 Years' War as they call it in Europe, was going on. And when it was over in 1763 and the British were successful, the Treasury was bankrupt. So who did they come to for help? The American colonies in 1763. From 1763 to 1774, a series of acts were passed, like the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Townshend Acts, which imposed taxes upon the colonies so that the British could recoup their losses financially. In 1773, of course, the Boston Tea Party took place. And in January 1774, after the Boston Tea Party, General Gage, Thomas Gage, arrived here in Boston as the military governor. The port of Boston was closed to all commercial shipping, and things began to heat up after 1774. On May 14th, 1775, the Provincial Congress of Massachusetts Committee of Safety, led by Artemus Ward and Dr. Joseph Warren, issued this order, and I quote, "Resolved, as the opinion of this committee, that all the livestock be taken from Noddle Island, Hog Island, and Snake Island, and from that part of Chelsea near the seacoast, and be driven back, and the execution of this business be committed by the Committee of Correspondence and Selectmen of the towns of Medford, Malden, and Chelsea, and Lynn, and they be supplied with such a number of men so they shall need from the regiment now in Medford." Again, this was issued by the Provincial Congress, Committee of Safety, led by Artemus Ward and Dr. Joseph Warren.
So Artemus Ward is the commander of the Massachusetts militia. So he's the highest ranking official in the Massachusetts military. And this, as Jeff was just talking about the Committee of Safety, this is a group that comes into existence with the, I won't say the collapse of the British government, but a change in allegiances. In the fall of 1774, General Gage had called for the assembly to meet in Salem, and then he realizes it might not be a good idea to have the assembly meet, so he calls it off. The members of the assembly show up in Salem, they say they never got the message, and they wait for the governor to open the session of the assembly, which he usually did. Of course, the governor doesn't show up because he called off the meeting. So they say, the governor didn't show up, therefore the office of governor is vacant. We will continue meeting as the provisional government, as the provincial Congress, and then they move out to Concord. So they become the de facto government of Massachusetts, while General Gage, who has a commission to govern, is in Boston with troops as well as a few people he's gotten to agree to serve on what's called the Mandamus Council. So you have these two conflicting governments in place, and the provincial Congress does tell people not to send their taxes to the collector in Boston, but instead send it to them. You know, follow the money. And so this is actually people in Massachusetts were determining to whom they would be loyal. So General Ward is commander of this army that has emerged, but there are troops from all over. John Stark had come down from New Hampshire. In fact, his troops don't come with him, but he is in Medford with several hundred militia troops. John Nixon is a colonel in the Massachusetts militia. Israel Putnam had come up from Connecticut, troops had come up from Rhode Island. So you have Boston surrounded by troops from many different states. And one of the really important things about the operation here at Chelsea Creek and Noddles Island, it's the first time men from different states have fought together under one command. It's because you have Nixon, Stark, and Putnam all cooperating in different ways, all operating in unison. In fact, Nixon marches out from Cambridge with his men, meets up with Stark and the militia, and they actually meet in the meeting house in what's now Revere.
Yep.
At the Chelsea Meeting House.
Yep.
And they have breakfast.
Yep, we're gonna talk all about that.
Okay, good.
Okay, stealing my talk. On May 23rd, 1775, now that's just a few days before the battle, another order was given by the Provincial Congress of Massachusetts Committee of Safety. I quote, "Whereas the forces, under the command of General Gage and Admiral Graves, are frequently plundering and making depredations on the islands and seacoasts of this province, from where they plunder or purchase hay, cattle, sheep, and many other things, to this injury not only into individuals, but to the great damage of the public, and this strengthens the hands of our enemies, therefore resolved that it be recommended to all those persons living on those several islands that they remove their hay, cattle, sheep, etc., that they are exposed to those ravages and cannot be sufficiently too far into the country as to be out of the way of these implacable enemies." Now, before I go on, something occurred on May 21st, 1775, on the South Shore, which has nothing to do with the Battle of Chelsea Creek, but it's, again, one of those incidents that's forgotten by history. It was called the Battle of Grape Island. May 21st, 1775, Elijah Levitt was giving hay to the British. Colonists from Weymouth fired upon the British troops, took boats to the islands, and drove the British away. What's important about this battle? Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, wrote to her husband, I quote, "You inquire of me who were at the engagement at Grape Island. I may say with truth that all of Weymouth, Braintree, Hingham, who were able to bear arms, and hundreds from other towns within 30 or 40 miles of Weymouth. Both your brothers," she writes, "were there. Your younger brother, with his company, who gained honor that day, he was one of the first to venture on board a schooner to land upon the island." Going back to our Battle of Chelsea Creek. I want to tell you about a couple of individuals who I'm not too fond of. One is Henry Howell Williams. Henry Howell Williams was the owner of the Williams Farm here in Chelsea, and he lived on Noddles Island, and he sold livestock to the British. He not only did that, but he was friendly with the judges and many British officials.
Actually, I think he gets a bad rep. And you think someone like Williams is in a tough position, because the British will ask to buy. If you refuse to sell, they might just seize your stuff. And if you do sell to the British, the patriots, like Dr. Perlman, will say, we'll take retaliation on you. He's really stuck. He has a very big house on Noddles Island, a very great wine cellar.
Which was burned, by the way.
Yeah, it was burned, and he does get compensated for it. Samuel, you're gonna get to Graves too.
I am.
But go on with Williams.
Okay, that's all I was gonna say about Williams. Another individual is Oliver Wendell of Kingston, also loyal to the British as well. On May 25th, 1775, a message was sent from General Gage to Admiral Graves. Quote, "I have this moment received information that the rebels intend this night to destroy and carry off all the livestock on Noddle's Island for no reason that because the owners, having sold them for the king's use, I therefore give you this intelligence," again, this is Gage to Graves, "so that you may please to order the guard boats to be particularly attentive and to take such other measures as you may think necessary for this night."
Did Graves and Gage like each other?
No, they really didn't, yeah. Whether it was professional or personal, I don't know, maybe both.
I think it was both, yeah.
Proper-
Navy and Army often don't get along.
Preparation for battle. As Dr. Allison mentioned, there were some leaders that I'd like to mention. My hero, and the man that I give tremendous credit to, was Colonel John Stark. He was a native of New Hampshire, and with around 300 men, he began his march to Chelsea from Medford. Second leader was Colonel John Nixon. He began his march from Cambridge, as Dr. Allison mentioned, meeting Stark in Medford, and together they would march to Chelsea. And the third was, and I'm proud to say this, the Chelsea Company, who were under the command of Colonel Samuel Garish and 63-year-old Samuel Sprague. Samuel Sprague, by the way, his age, of course, is amazing, but he led a detachment from the Chelsea Company, and I'm proud to say that he is buried, along with many others, in the Rumney Marsh Burial Ground in Revere. When I give tours of the Rumney Marsh Burial Ground, I mention not only Samuel Sprague, but many other important individuals, both veterans and others, including 16 slaves that are buried there as well. The Rumney Marsh Burial Ground on Butler Street in Revere. Well, another man who I'd like to mention, part of the Chelsea Company, was Lawani Baldwin. That name sounds familiar, it should. He was a soldier, an engineer, and a civil engineer, I should say. He was part of the Chelsea Company, and they were all familiar with the topography on the area. On the early morning of May 27th, the armies met at a meeting house in Chelsea. That meeting house on Beach Street is still standing today. It was, of course, a meeting house, a tavern, then it became later on a Masonic temple, and it's now a counseling center. It was first built in 1710, right on Beach Street. And when I give tours of Revere, bus tours of Revere, everybody, of course, wants to see the beach, and Kelly's, that's what they think Revere is. But I also take them to Slade's Mill, I take them to the site of the Battle of Chelsea Creek, the library, and I also take them to here as well, to the meeting house. After a small meal, they began their trip to Sales Farm, which is today Beachmont. John Sales owned a large farm on the coast, and that's where the armies would march from the meeting house to begin their evacuation of the livestock. To begin their attempts to evacuate the livestock from the islands, they had a short route from the meeting house, reaching Winthrop Street, a straight route to Sales Farm, with only fences bordering their journey. The troops arrived at Sales Farm around 10 a.m.
So Samuel Graves also, he was an admiral.
Thank you.
Was an admiral, and he was interested in Noddle's Island partly because he had a warehouse on it where he had goods he was getting because the Navy was sending supplies, but he then was selling them. He was a man who looked out for his own interests as well as the interests of the empire. And he was also very good at finding employment for his nephews in His Majesty's service. So we'll be talking about at least one of his nephews later, who's a captain.
Mm-hmm.
So when he gets this word from General Gage that the rebels are going to seize things, he's interested, but the rebels don't actually get there that night. It's, I think, the next night that for some reason they get there. But this is what is happening on the British side, and Graves' real interest is in his warehouse on the island, as the rebels now are converging on it, meeting over in, on the other side of Belle Isle.
So again, the roundup begins from Sales Farm. They crossed to Hog Island, which is today Orient Heights, and the provincials removed many cows and sheep and brought them back to the mainland. A small detachment of about 30 provincials then began to cross over Crooked Creek to Noddle's Island, which is today East Boston, to round up the cattle owned by Henry Howell Williams.
Crooked Creek, for those who are interested, is roughly where Boardman Street is in East Boston today.
Right.
So there's a lowland before you get to Orient Heights.
On the way to the
And there's a marshy area on both sides of the creek.
In their enthusiasm, and this is the mistake that the provincials would make, in their enthusiasm, the provincials set fire to the haystacks, which was seen by the British ship Preston at Boston Harbor. It was reported that there were 600 men in total from Massachusetts and New Hampshire, of which 30 of them, as I mentioned, crossed over to Noddle's Island. And along with the haystacks, Williams's house was also set on fire by the enthusiastic 30. 15 horses were removed and only a few cattle. British Admiral Samuel Graves signaled for the schooner Diana to sail into Chelsea Creek. Many cannon were on the Diana. Graves also ordered several barges with Marines, as well as Graves' nephew Thomas, who was in charge of the Diana. And in my research, I also found that another nephew by the name of John Graves was also sent that day down Chelsea Creek aboard one of the barges. He was warned, by the way, Thomas, he was warned by his uncle Samuel of the shifting tides in the river. The Diana, by the way, had 4 6-pound cannon, 12 swivels, and small guns that were maneuverable. The battle. The provincials returned the fire from the ditches in the low ground into which they dropped, often in mud and water up to their necks. Now this is between Noddle's Island and Hog Island. Amos Farnsworth kept a diary of the battle. These are his words. We crossed Crooked Creek, and about 15 of us squared down in a ditch in the marsh and stood our ground. And then came a company of regulars, the march on the other side of the river and the schooner. And we had hot fire until the regulars retreated. But notwithstanding, the bullets flew very thick, but there was not a man of us killed. End of quote. The retreat gave the provincials time to leave Hog Island for the Sales Farm, while the colonists protected themselves in ditches, sometimes up to their necks in water. Sailors and Marines on the barges attempted to drive them back, continuing to exert every effort in towing and controlling the direction of the schooner. The sloop against the wind and tide currents in the narrow confines made it difficult. And by dusk, the Diana became grounded in the mud. It was now getting dark. Israel Putnam and his troops began to arrive around 9 o'clock that evening from Connecticut.
Actually, Putnam was given command of the overall operation, but he's in Cambridge at headquarters. And it's only around 5 p.m. when two things happen to alert him. One is the sound of cannon, because you can fire cannon in Chelsea Creek. You could hear them over in Cambridge near Harvard Square. And the other thing is Stark and Nixon had sent a messenger to Putnam saying, send reinforcements.
Yeah.
So this is when Israel Putnam, who is a man who has a great reputation, primarily of his own making, swings into action. It was said in his hometown in Connecticut that he had once gone into a cave and wrestled with a bear and won. And if people doubted it, they would point out the cave. That's where it happened. And so he gets his artillery and begins the march.
Yes, I'll talk about Putnam in a few minutes, but one of the first things Putnam does is he verbally yells out to the Diana, "Do you wish to surrender? We'll give you quarter." And in response, the Diana fired off a cannon shot, which in other words said, "Damn you, no."
But they missed it.
Yeah. The British wolves were actually on the run, and the arrival of General Putnam increased the number of hounds yelping at the heels of the scurrying pack. Putnam arrived with about 300 men and 2 cannon, and at once assumed command due to his rank, as Bob said. During this time, the battle was severe. Every moment, provincials were arriving at Winner's Summit, assisting in the attack.
This was happening, Joe?
This-
This part of the battle specifically?
Not far from where Slade's Mill is today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a marker
There's
near
a
the
marker,
site,
right.
near the hockey.
exactly, we'll talk about that too later. Yep, okay. The firing upon the provincials by the schooner did no particular damage. Putnam made a report, again, blowing himself up as the hero of the battle. But he made a report back to Artemis Ward, and I like to quote what he said. "I wish we could have something of this to do every day. It would teach our men how little danger there is from cannonballs, for though they sent a great many at us, nobody has been burnt by them. I would that Gage and his troops were within our reach, but we would be like hornets about their ears, as little birds follow and tease the eagle in his flight. We would every day continue to make them uneasy." The most serious wound, by the way, reported was concerning the colonists, was from a man from Townsend, Massachusetts, belonging to Asa Farnsworth's company. A bullet went through his mouth from one cheek to the other. The burning of the Diana. It was Joseph Warren who gave the orders to burn the Diana, which had been stuck in the mud, and at the same time many of the soldiers and sailors aboard the Diana were scurrying to the barges so that they could escape. Loami Baldwin and 12 others began to row out after midnight, and before burning the ship, they took everything of value. That included sails, rigging, money, cannon, anything that they could take back with them. By the way, Loami Baldwin is considered the father of civil engineering and was well selected for this work. He was, as I mentioned, a major in the Chelsea Company, and along with Sam Pratt, that's a familiar name, who carried hay from a nearby farm, did the Chelsea Company proud. Not only rigging, sails, and money were taken, but the Diana's 76-foot mast was cut down and taken eventually to Prospect Hill. The American flag was flown there in the face of the British, and it was flying there up until March 1776, when, as you know, the British evacuated Boston.
January 1st of 1776 is when they raised the hill flag for the first time on
Yeah.
Prospect Hill.
What a sight that must have been for the
Yeah,
British to
really.
look up and see that, you know.
Yeah.
Where is Prospect Hill?
It's
Some
in
of them.
Somerville.
Some of them.
They still commemorate that every year on
Yes, they do.
January 1st. You can
Yes,
go
they
to have
do.
the flag raising on Prospect Hill.
Right.
Thank you.
It was first on Winter Hill, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. Then they moved it to
Yeah,
Prospect Hill.
felt closer.
Yeah. Every time I do research on this battle, I learn something new. You know, you think you know everything, right? And there's probably still more to learn, I'm sure. Putnam was the ranking officer present, and by rule, he was entitled to recognition as such. However, he did not participate in the raid on Hogg, on Noddle's Island, nor in the pitched battle there. The real leader, in my opinion, the real leader of the battle was Colonel John Stark. Later, 3 weeks later, he would lead troops to repulse the British twice at Bunker Hill. And in 1776, Stark participated at the Battle of Trenton And in 1777, he was the hero at the Battle of Bennington, which would lead to the British surrender in October 1777 at the Battle of Saratoga. The so-called turning point of the American Revolution on October 17, 1777. I tell my students that's an easy date to remember because of all the sevens. And it was, of course, the date in which the French finally decided to come onto our side.
Stark actually had left the army, though, between Trenton and here because he was passed over for promotion. John Sullivan from New Hampshire instead was promoted to general in the Continental Army, so Stark left. But when he hears about the British invasion from Canada, he leads the New Hampshire forces to Bennington.
Once again, yeah.
And probably all of you know one famous line that John Stark said.
Oh, I'm going to mention that, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Live free or die.
Live free or die, very good. Live free or die on the New Hampshire license plates, first issued by Colonel John Stark. And by the way, if you visit the Bunker Hill Monument, and I've done it with my students, and climb the steps, but before you do, there's a park ranger that gives a lecture on the Battle of Bunker Hill. And one of the pictures on the wall is of Colonel John Stark of New Hampshire. He learned, by the way, Stark, he learned his experience in the French and Indian War, that it's better to separate the enemy from his supplies. He was 150 years ahead of his time in military strategy, and as I mentioned, he's quoted as the first to say, live free or die. Colonel John Nixon. Nixon was a native of Sudbury, Massachusetts, Sudbury Minutemen, who led troops at Lexington and Concord, and he also fought at Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775. Later, he participated in the campaign in New York and New Jersey in 1776. He led troops at Harlem Heights in that year, and later at Saratoga. Eventually, he received the rank of Brigadier General. That's John Nixon. According to Benjamin Shurtleff, the Patriots brought to the mainland from the islands a total of 6 horses, 27 horned cattle, and 411 sheep. In terms of casualties, these are estimates, of course. The British losses, wounded and killed, somewhere between 35 and 60. The Provincials, 2 wounded, not 1 killed. I also, before I talk about the significance of the battle and conclude, was a quote that I found, another quote that I found from Amos Farnsworth's diary. Quote, "Blessed be God for the interposition of his providence on our side, and in saving of us in ye late battle, when in such imminent danger, surely God fought the battle, and not we." Amos Farnsworth. The importance and significance of the Battle of Chelsea Creek. Number 1, excluding the capture of Fort Ticonderoga by Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys on May 10th, 1775, the Battle of Chelsea Creek can be called the second major engagement of the American Revolution. Number 2, it was the first armed and offensive military engagement deliberately entered upon by Massachusetts citizens. 3rd, here was the first capture and destruction of a British vessel during the war. 4th, for the first time, the colonists united against a common enemy. Stark coming down from New Hampshire, Nixon from Massachusetts, and General Putnam coming up from Connecticut. 5th, it was the first battle in American history where cannon was used. The Battle of Chelsea Creek was more than just a cattle raid. And we should be proud that between the battles of Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Bunker Hill, we witnessed history in our own backyard. Today, just west of the skating rink on Broadway, stands a marker commemorating the bravery and patriotism of the heroes from the Battle of Chelsea Creek. That monument, I am proud to say, was erected in 1999, and I was part of a committee along with John Henry and Fred Sinello and others who decided to finally erect some kind of a monument there near where the battle was fought. And I was asked to write the words for that battle. And it's there, right next to the skating rink. There's a Massachusetts flag and an American flag and the monument right there that briefly explains to you what I've and Professor Allison talked about today. Finally, acknowledgements. I'd like to say that I did everything myself, but I didn't. I did a lot of research, and among the sources that I used, Benjamin Shirtless, History of Revere, Harold Banks, The Colonists of Chelsea Creek, David Procopio, who wrote an article called The Time to Stand and Fight, Robert McKay, The Battle of Chelsea Creek, Elaine McGrath, A History of Chelsea Creek, and of course, the primary sources that I used, many of them from the diary of Amos Farnsworth. I hope, as I tell my students, that in the last half hour to 45 minutes, you learned at least one thing about the Battle of Chelsea Creek that you didn't know when you walked in here. May I see a show of hands for anybody who learned just one thing they didn't know before they walked in here? Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
The trench warfare, was that just because the tide had gone out, or did they reinforce
No.
trenches?
No, they're crossing over, they're getting across the marsh, and there's a ditch.
Right.
So, and it's just 15 guys of the 30 who get into that ditch so the others can get away. So no, they didn't have time to do any digging. And at Bunker Hill they do, and
Yeah.
that's, and- yes,
In at least one history book I've seen, it references the Battle of Noddle's Island.
yes.
So is Chelsea the more typical name for the battle, or is it just from the person's research?
That's a very interesting question, because actually the discussions between Chelsea and East Boston kind of hinged on whether it is called Chelsea Creek or Noddle's Island, with some of the East Boston historians saying there are no maps saying it was Chelsea Creek then, it went to the Chelsea
Right,
River.
maybe that's-
But then again, on the other side, no one knows what Noddle's Island is today.
Right,
But,
I even heard the Battle of the Chelsea River.
yeah,
okay,
Yeah.
okay,
But in most sources that I've
Right.
seen, it's the Battle of Chelsea Creek.
right.
yeah.
And the one source that I've seen that it was Chelsea Creek, I think it came out in the early 1900s. That was done by the Sons of the American
Right,
Revolution.
yeah, yeah.
So that they put that history together. So by that time, obviously Chelsea Creek was named that, and it probably, I would
Yeah.
guess in the late.
Yes, Lourdes?
What I also have seen that some books say Battle of the Chelsea Creek, and on parentheses they put Battle of Hook and Noodle Islands.
Okay.
So just to kind of clarify, I also reached out to a few libraries that on their archives, it's listed as the Battle of the Hook Islands. So it was the first time that they heard about the Battle of the
Okay.
Chelsea Creek.
By the way, something I didn't mention as well, and Professor Allison knows this, of course, is that in the 18th century, many of these officers in the Navy were awarded their position because they had money or they knew someone, like an uncle. And so Thomas Graves and John Graves probably got their commissions with help from their Uncle Samuel, there's no question about it. And of course, the corruption that was going on during the wars for empire also led to that salutary neglect. Okay? So as I say to my students, if it wasn't for corruption and graft, maybe we would never have won the American Revolution. Thank God for that. British Parliament.
Thomas Graves, who loses the Diana, does have a very distinguished career in the British Navy subsequently. And this gentleman in the back,
Doesn't he become a lord?
he may have, I know he becomes an admiral.
Yeah.
And in fact, the day of this battle, Admiral Graves was celebrating because he had just been promoted to Admiral of the Light. So he was having a celebration aboard when he sees the smoke rising and sends his nephew off to take care of it.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I got a quick comment and a question. The comment I wanted to, you answered a question for me about John Nixon. I wanted to confirm whether he came from Sudbury or not. I wanted to point out in Concord and Lincoln during the Battle Road, the Minutemen from Sudbury and Framingham came to the south at the Bloody Angle or Bloody Curve, and the Minutemen from Reading and Woburn came from the north, and they caught the British at the Bloody Angle or Bloody Curve, so he was instrumental in that battle as well, aside from, you said Harlem Heights and Saratoga.
Yeah.
And-
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. Well, the question I had was I wanted to ask about the Groton cannon that purportedly was taken from a Diana and is now travels around on display, restored cannon. I think it was Asa Lawrence, might have been a guy from Pepperell that has the cannon. Had the cannon.
Was that the cannon that was eventually on Bunker Hill?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It said it went to
And
Bunker
it's
Hill.
coming on the 24th too.
That's coming on the 24th.
Yes.
Excellent.
So do you have
To
any,
Chelsea, yes.
any background on that cannon, and can comment or support the claim it came from the
Come on the 24th.
I'm gonna. So,
Very
yeah.
good.
So
Yeah.
what I heard from the canon is this historian from Groton that it's now his wife is keeping his legacy. So yes, claims that it's an original canon, that it has been restored.
Yeah,
And
I met her last week, yeah.
there is a great video that you can see the whole process of restoration, that it was made by the Lowell Sun, that it was the local newspaper in Lowell, that it's also closed now. So you can, yeah, on the 24th, you will have the chance to see the cannon and interact with his wife, and they also have educational materials around the cannon.
I also want to say that one of our hidden gems in Revere is the museum on 108 Beach Street by the Revere Society of Cultural and Historical Preservation, the RSCHP. Brendan O'Brien, who's sitting over here, is the president of RSCHP. And whether you're from Revere or from Chelsea, we have several floors, each one a separate room, marked off with a different theme from the history of Revere and Chelsea. And I would urge all of you to visit this wonderful building at 108 Beach Street, across from the Immaculate Conception Church, and see for yourself and read about the history that Revere and Chelsea both have in common. We have a room dedicated to Horatio Alger. We have a room dedicated to the schools. We have a room dedicated to the Revere Beach, the military. There are tours of that building as well, and along with Brendan, a woman by the name of Toby Pearlstein is the curator, and I'm sure you can get in touch with her if you, especially if you want to take a group over there as well. I'm proud of being the city historian of Revere, and I try as much as I can to talk about the good things, because as you all know, we've not had the greatest reputation. I was brought up in Revere, I went to Revere Public Schools, and first got interested in, to tell you the truth, as a kid, wanting to know who some of the streets were named after. I happened to be brought up on Constitution Avenue, okay? And from there, I wanted to know a little bit more about the city, and sort of self-educated myself. And in 1976, during our bicentennial, I was teaching in Revere, and I went to the Revere Journal. The editor was Dick Powers at that time, and I said to Mr. Powers, my name is Jeff Perlman, I teach in Revere, and for the bicentennial, I would like to write a column for the Revere Journal each week, beginning with the Native Americans and ending with the development of Revere Beach. He said, we can't pay you. I said, I don't want any money, I just want to do this for the benefit of our citizens. And in 1976, and you can go to the microfilm at the Revere Library and still see those articles, very young-looking Jeff Perlman in the picture there, did that. And then, in the early 90s, I was teaching at the Abraham Lincoln School, and computers were coming in. And Dr. Rocco Malfitano was the principal of the Lincoln School, and at a teachers' meeting one day, he said, you know, computers are now going to become not an elective anymore, but a mandatory course. If anybody has any ideas for a new elective, let me know. Well, I had a whole 16-week curriculum on the history of Revere. And I approached him, and he accepted it, and for years, not only did I teach it, but it was also taught along with field trips at Revere High School, still being taught at Revere High School. And last Juneteenth, an assistant principal of Revere High School asked me if I would not only give a tour to the students of Revere High School of the Rumney Marsh Burial Ground, but also talk about Juneteenth. Why? Because several years ago, I discovered that there were 16 slaves buried in unmarked graves in the Rumney Marsh Burial Ground. And I approached the RSCHP, and we appropriated money for 2 plaques to be built there. And in my research, I found out the slaves' names, who owned them, and how they died, and their age, and in some cases, how they died. And those plaques are there today. And when I give tours of the cemetery, I indeed point out those plaques, as well as talk about the Civil War veterans that are buried there. I also talk about a very interesting man, hope I'm not boring you, a fellow by the name of Reverend Phillips Payson. Reverend Phillips Payson, and this goes back to the American Revolution. He was one of our ministers at the Meeting House, which was the church on Beach Street. And on April 19th, 1775, he stepped down from his pulpit and actually volunteered and joined the Minutemen and met the British at Menotomy, which is today Arlington, and cut off reinforcements on their way to Lexington. And he was successful. Right after that battle, he went back to the pulpit. But that wasn't the end of his story. Amazingly, in 1787, the United States Constitution was ratified. But it couldn't go into effect unless the states ratified it. And so, in 1787, delegates from Massachusetts and Maine, of course, which was part of Massachusetts, met in Boston to ratify the Constitution. And they argued back and forth. And Reverend Payson represented Chelsea. And one of the things that I admire about Reverend Payson was when a question came up of whether or not there should be a religious qualification to run for office, despite being a clergyman, Reverend Payson said there should be no religious qualification for running for office. He's an extraordinary man, Reverend Phillips Payson. His father went to Harvard and was a minister, and he did as well. Again, I could talk all day, as Brendan knows, about the Rumney Marsh Burial Ground. But I'll let you go on a tour the next time we have it, and you can hear it. I was thrilled that Congresswoman Catherine Clark came to one of my tours last year.
I think what Jeff is, I think the thing I think has really been special is hearing Jeff talk about telling the story. That is, the Revere Journal didn't look for someone to do this, but he began this, and teaching a course on Revere history. And I've been inspired over the past year to see the way the city of Chelsea has been embracing its history with the Chelsea 400, and with other events, and events like this, and events like Chelsea Creek, because communities all need their history, and they're the ones who should share it. Don't wait for someone at Harvard to write your book. The stories are here. And just one last consequence of the Battle of Chelsea Creek, it was all about livestock. And after this, the British were cut off from this supply on the Harbor Islands, and they had to go further afield. And in the middle of the summer, General Gage reports back to London that he had sent a ship to Connecticut, and it came back with sheep and cattle. And he was happy about this, because of course if you're living on hardtack and dead rats, this is going to look pretty good. It's sheep and cattle. Of course in London, well wait a minute, we sent this guy to win a war, and now he's celebrating bringing back a boatload of sheep and cattle. And one London newspaper had a little poem about in days of old, British troops captured warlike kings in battle, but now alas, their honor droops, for Gage brings naught but harmless cattle. So Chelsea Creek is a great moment, and I want to commend the city of Chelsea for commemorating it. So
Absolutely. And again, if you want to get in touch with me, my email is simply jperlman@salemstate.edu, and I'll be glad to answer any of your questions. Actually, if I have the time, I'd be even willing to talk to any group that you'd like about the Battle of Chelsea Creek. I think that important, especially when it comes, as Dr. Allison said, to disillusioning many of the British, and eventually, of course, them evacuating a year later, less than a year later, the city of Boston, never to return again. Never to return again.
So I want to
Evacuate-
thank you both for presenting today, and we do have a whole lineup of additional programs if folks want to learn more about the house, more about colonial history. This coming Thursday, we'll be doing a presentation with all original resources of letters to and from Chelsea during that siege of Boston, and learning more about William Baldwin and Samuel Sprague, who is the tenant farmer here. So if you could join me in thanking our presenters for today.
Thank you.